On a sweltering summer afternoon, 11-year-old Lily Brennan sits behind a handmade lemonade stand, every dollar bringing her closer to saving her little brother's life. Three men in their 20s pull up and begin mocking her disability, their cruelty escalating while neighbors turn away in silence. Then the distant rumble of engines grows louder, and the ground begins to shake as 100 Hell's Angels motorcycles thunder down the street. What happens next will expose the darkness in this quiet neighborhood and reveal a truth that no one saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The August sun blazed down on Oakwood Drive with the kind of heat that made the asphalt shimmer and stick to your shoes. It was 3:15 in the afternoon, that dead hour when most sensible people had retreated indoors to their air conditioning, leaving the suburban street quiet except for the occasional bark of a dog or the hum of a distant lawnmower. But Lily Brennan couldn't afford to wait for cooler weather or better timing. Every hour counted. She sat in her wheelchair behind a small folding table her mother had helped her set up that morning. A handwritten cardboard sign leaned against the front, the letters carefully drawn in bright pink and blue marker. Lemonade, $2. Help save my brother Noah. Beneath it, in smaller writing, she'd added, "Every cup counts. Thank you for your kindness." The pitcher of lemonade sat sweating in a bucket of rapidly melting ice, condensation pooling on the plastic table cover decorated with cartoon lemons. A stack of red plastic cups waited beside it, along with a small metal cash box that held exactly $17.35, the result of 2 days of work. She needed so much more. Lily was 11 years old, with long chestnut hair, pulled back in a ponytail that her mother had braided that morning. Her face was sun-flushed, freckles scattered across her nose like cinnamon sprinkled on toast. She wore a yellow sundress that her grandmother had sent for her birthday, and on her lap sat a small photo in a handmade frame, a picture of her and her 8-year-old brother Noah taken last Christmas. In the photo, they were both laughing, Noah's gap-toothed grin infectious even in a still image. That was before the diagnosis, before the word cardiomyopathy had become part of their daily vocabulary, before the doctors had told them that without surgery, Noah had maybe 6 months. The surgery cost $63,000. Their insurance would cover some of it, but not enough, not nearly enough. The hospital had given them a number, $28,000, that the family had to come up with, or Noah's name would keep sliding down the waiting list while other children with better funding moved ahead. Her mother worked double shifts as a nurse at the county hospital, and her father had taken a second job doing overnight security. But even with both of them working themselves to exhaustion, the money wasn't coming fast enough. So Lily had made a decision. She couldn't work a job, couldn't do the things other kids could do to earn money. The car accident when she was 6 had seen to that, leaving her with limited mobility in her legs and dependent on the wheelchair that had become as much a part of her as her own shadow. But she could do this. She could sit at a lemonade stand. She could smile at neighbors. She could ask for help. The wheelchair had been a fact of her life for 5 years now. She barely remembered the accident itself, just fragments, the screech of tires, her mother's scream, the smell of deployed airbags. The drunk driver who'd run the red light had walked away with minor injuries. Lily had spent 3 months in the hospital and came home to a life that looked different than the one she'd left. Some days it didn't bother her. She'd learned to adapt, to navigate her world on wheels, to find workarounds for the things her body couldn't do anymore. Other days, especially days like today when people stared or whispered or looked away too quickly, she felt the weight of being different pressing down on her like a physical thing. But Noah needed her. And that was bigger than her discomfort. Bigger than her fear, bigger than the voice in her head that whispered she should just stay inside where it was safe. A silver sedan had slowed down earlier, and an elderly woman had bought 2 cups of lemonade and pressed a $10 bill into Lily's hand, refusing change. "For your brother," she'd said, her eyes wet. A jogger had stopped, bought a cup, and left a 5. A mother with 2 small children had let each kid pick a cup and added a 20 to the cash box. Each time, Lily had felt a swell of hope, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, this could work. But the afternoon was growing long, and the foot traffic had slowed to almost nothing. The ice in the bucket was now mostly water. Her arms ached from wheeling herself back and forth from the house to refill the pitcher. The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and amber. She was considering packing up for the day when she heard the sound of an engine, loud and aggressive, coming down the street. A black pickup truck with oversized tires and a Confederate flag sticker on the back window rolled into view, music thumping from speakers that rattled the truck's frame. It slowed as it approached her stand, and Lily felt her stomach tighten. 3 men sat in the cab, all in their early 20s, all wearing sleeveless shirts that showed off tattooed arms. The driver had a buzz cut and wraparound sunglasses. The passenger wore a backward baseball cap, and the one in the middle had a scruffy beard and a smirk that made Lily's skin prickle with unease. The truck pulled over and parked at the curb, the engine cutting off but the music still pounding. All 3 doors opened and the men climbed out, laughing about something one of them had said. They were tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with the casual confidence of people who'd never had to worry about being noticed for the wrong reasons. Derek Ashford, the driver, spotted the lemonade stand first. He was the type who'd peaked in high school, the former quarterback who still wore his Letterman jacket to the bar and told stories about the state championship game like it had happened yesterday instead of 5 years ago. His friends, Kyle Brenner and Jason Ridge, had been his offensive line back then, and they still followed his lead now, laughing at his jokes and backing his plays like they were still on the field. "Well, well," Derek said, his voice carrying across the quiet street. "Look what we got here, boys. A little entrepreneur." They approached the stand, and Lily forced herself to smile, the way her mother had taught her. Be polite, be friendly. People respond to warmth. "Hi," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her chest. "Would you like some lemonade? It's fresh squeezed and it's only $2 a cup. All the money goes toward my brother's surgery." Derek stopped in front of the table, hands on his hips, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Kyle and Jason flanked him, their eyes moving from the sign to Lily to the wheelchair. "Surgery, huh?" Derek said, picking up the photo of Noah. "What's wrong with him?" "He has a heart condition," Lily said quietly. "He needs surgery, but it's really expensive, and we're trying to raise money to help pay for it." Derek studied the photo for a long moment, then set it back down. "That's rough," he said, and for half a second Lily thought maybe he meant it. Then he glanced at his friends and the smirk returned. "So you're out here in this heat, selling lemonade. How much you made so far?" Lily hesitated. Something about the way he asked made her not want to answer, but she didn't know how to avoid it without seeming rude. "A little over $17, she said. Kyle let out a low whistle. 17 whole dollars. "Wow, at that rate you'll have enough in what, 5 years? Jason snorted. "Maybe 10. Derek leaned against the table, and it shifted slightly under his weight. "You really think you're going to save your brother by selling $2 lemonade to soccer moms?" "I'm trying to help," Lily said, her smile faltering. "Every little bit counts. Every little bit," Derek repeated, drawing out the words mockingly. He turned to Kyle. "You hear that? Every little bit counts." "That's cute," Kyle said. "Real cute." The air around the stand had changed. What had started as teasing was curdling into something darker, something with edges. Lily's hands tightened on the armrests of her wheelchair. She could feel her pulse in her throat. "So what happened to you?" Jason asked, nodding toward the wheelchair. His tone was casual, almost conversational, but there was a cruelty underneath it, like a hook hidden in bait. "Car accident," Lily said quietly, her eyes dropping to the table. "Car accident," Derek repeated. "Man, that sucks. But hey, at least you can still roll around and sell lemonade, right?" He laughed and his friends joined in. It wasn't a kind laugh. It was the kind of laugh that made Lily feel small and exposed, like she was standing naked in front of a crowd. Across the street, Mrs. Patricia Donovan, a retired teacher who'd lived on Oakwood Drive for 30 years, stood on her porch, watering her hanging baskets of petunias. She paused, the stream of water from her hose going still as she watched the scene unfold. Her hand tightened on the nozzle. She could hear their voices, could see the way Lily's shoulders had tensed. For a moment, she considered walking over. But the men were young and loud, and she was 72 years old and alone. What could she do? She turned the water back on and focused on her flowers, telling herself it wasn't her business. 2 houses down, Mr. Henry Walsh sat on his front step with a beer, watching the interaction with narrowed eyes. He didn't like Derek Ashford. Never had. The kid was trouble, always had been. But Henry had learned a long time ago that getting involved in other people's problems usually just made things worse. He took a sip of his beer and looked away. Back at the stand, Derek reached out and flicked the edge of the cardboard sign, making it wobble. "Help save my brother Noah," he read aloud in a mocking, high-pitched voice. "That's really pulling at the heartstrings. Did you come up with that yourself, or did Mommy help you?" "I wrote it," Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper now. "You wrote it," Derek said, nodding slowly. "Good for you. Using that sympathy angle. Smart. People love a good sob story." "It's not a story," Lily said, and for the first time there was a tremor in her voice. "It's real." "My brother is sick." "Oh, I'm sure he is," Derek said, waving his hand dismissively. "I'm just saying you're really working that whole poor disabled girl thing, you know? It's good marketing." Kyle picked up one of the plastic cups and held it up to the light like he was inspecting a fine wine. $2 for lemonade," he said. "That's pretty steep. What makes your lemonade worth $2? "It's for my brother," Lily repeated, her voice cracking slightly. "Yeah, we got that part," Jason said. "But is it organic? Is it artisanal? What's the pitch here?" They were laughing again, all 3 of them, and Lily felt something inside her beginning to crack. She'd prepared herself for people saying no. She'd even prepared herself for people being rude. But she hadn't prepared herself for this, for being mocked, for having her fear and desperation turned into a joke. "Please," she said quietly. "If you don't want to buy any, that's okay. But please don't what?" Derek cut her off. "Please don't tell you the truth. Look, kid, I'm doing you a favor here. The real world doesn't care about your sob stories. Nobody's gonna save your brother but you. And sitting here selling watered-down lemonade isn't gonna cut it." He reached out and tipped the pitcher slightly. Not enough to spill it, but enough to make Lily gasp and reach for it. The men laughed harder, and all along Oakwood Drive, people watched from behind curtains and through screen doors. They watched, and they said nothing. Derek steadied the pitcher with a grin that didn't reach his eyes, watching Lily's panicked reaction with obvious satisfaction. The yellow liquid sloshed dangerously close to the rim before settling. "Relax," he said. "I'm not going to spill your precious lemonade. Not yet, anyway." Kyle had moved around to the side of the table, examining the cash box with exaggerated interest. $17.35, he said, counting through the bills and coins. "That's what, maybe 8 or 9 cups? All day in this heat for less than $20? He shook his head with mock sympathy. "That's just sad." "Please put that back," Lily said, her voice stronger now, though her hands trembled slightly as they gripped her wheelchair's armrests. "That money is for my brother." "Oh, we know," Jason chimed in, pulling up the photo of Noah again. Little Noah with his bad ticker. Real heartbreaker. He held the photo at arm's length, squinting at it. "He looks pretty healthy in this picture. You sure he's actually sick, or is this just a scam?" The words hit Lily like a physical blow. Her face flushed hot, and she felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, but she forced them back. She wouldn't cry in front of these men. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. "He's sick," she said, her jaw tight. "The doctors at County General diagnosed him 4 months ago. He needs a heart transplant, and we're on a waiting list. But we need money for the surgery and the medications," and she stopped herself, realizing she was explaining, defending, justifying herself to people who clearly didn't care. "County General," Derek repeated, his tone dripping with disdain. "That's the charity hospital, right? We're all the—" He paused, glancing at Lily's brown skin, her second-hand dress, the worn wheels on her chair. "Where all the people who can't afford real health care go?" The implication hung in the air like smoke. Lily felt it settle over her, that familiar weight of being judged not for who she was, but for what she represented to people like Derek. People who looked at her and saw poverty, disability and otherness all wrapped into one easy target. Kyle set the cash box down with a loud clatter that made Lily flinch. "You know what I think?" he said, leaning against the table. "I think this whole thing is probably a scam. I mean, who's to say this money is actually going to any surgery? For all we know, you're pocketing it for video games or whatever kids are into these days." "It's not a scam," Lily said, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "My brother is dying. The hospital has all the records. My mom has been trying to—" "Your mom," Derek interrupted. "Where is your mom right now? She just let you sit out here by yourself?" He looked up and down the street theatrically. "What kind of parent does that?" "She's at work," Lily said quietly. "She works at the hospital. She's trying to save money for Noah's surgery." "At the hospital," Jason said with a snort. "Let me guess, she's a janitor." "She's a nurse," Lily shot back, surprising herself with the sharpness in her voice. "Ooh, touchy," Derek said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "Didn't mean to insult Mom's career. I'm sure she's great at whatever it is she does." He paused, then added with deliberate cruelty, "Too bad she's not great enough to afford her son's surgery without sending her crippled daughter out to beg for money." The word hit Lily like a slap. Crippled. She'd heard it before, of course. In whispers behind her back, in careless comments from strangers, in the mouths of children who didn't know better. But hearing it used as a weapon, wielded with precision to cause maximum damage, made something inside her crack. "I'm not begging," she said. And now the tears were coming, whether she wanted them to or not. "I'm trying to help my family." "There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that," Kyle mimicked in a whiny voice. And Jason laughed. Derek picked up one of the plastic cups and examined it like he was considering a purchase. "Tell you what," he said. "I'll buy a cup. Show you I'm not a total monster." He pulled out his wallet, made a show of looking through it, then pulled out a dollar bill. "Oh wait, you said $2, right? That seems kind of expensive. How about I give you $1 and we call it even?" "The sign says $2, Lily said, her voice barely a whisper now. "Yeah, but I'm thinking that's negotiable," Derek said. "I mean, beggars can't be choosers, right?" He laughed at his own joke, and his friends joined in. From her porch across the street, Mrs. Donovan had abandoned all pretense of watering her flowers. She stood frozen, hose in hand, watching the scene with growing distress. She thought about her own grandchildren, about how she'd feel if someone treated them this way. Her hand moved toward her phone in her pocket, then hesitated. "Call who, the police? For what exactly? Being mean? They weren't breaking any laws. And getting involved might just make things worse for the poor girl." Mr. Walsh had stood up from his step, his beer forgotten. He took 2 steps toward the street, then stopped. What was he going to do? Get into a confrontation with 3 men half his age? He was 68 years old, with a bad knee and high blood pressure. He'd probably have a heart attack before he even reached them. He stood there, caught between his conscience and his caution, doing nothing. A young couple walking their dog on the opposite sidewalk slowed as they passed, the woman tugging on her husband's arm and whispering urgently. The husband glanced over, his face tightening with disapproval, but he shook his head and kept walking. "Not our problem," he muttered, Back at the stand, Jason had picked up the handmade sign and was examining it with exaggerated scrutiny. "This is some real kindergarten-level artwork," he said. "Did you make this yourself, or did your disabled friends help you?" "Give that back," Lily said, reaching for it, but Jason held it just out of her reach, forcing her to lean forward in her wheelchair. The motion made her unstable, and for a terrifying second, she thought she might tip forward. She grabbed the armrests and steadied herself, her heart pounding. "Careful there," Derek said with mock concern. "Wouldn't want you to fall and hurt yourself. Then your mom would have 2 kids in the hospital." They were all laughing now, feeding off each other's cruelty, the way hyenas feed off a kill. The sound of their laughter seemed to fill the entire street, sharp and ugly against the soft summer evening. Derek finally poured himself a cup of lemonade, took a long, slow sip, and made an exaggerated face of disgust. "Ugh, this is terrible," he said, even though Lily could see from his expression that it wasn't. "Tastes like powder mix and tap water." "You're really charging $2 for this garbage?" He held the cup out over the street, tilting it slowly, letting the liquid drain out onto the asphalt in a steady stream. Lily watched, helpless, as her lemonade formed a yellow puddle that ran toward the gutter. "Oops," Derek said, tossing the empty cup onto the table. "My hand slipped." Kyle picked up the pitcher now, hefting it like he was weighing it. "This is what, maybe 6 more cups worth? That's $12 you could make. If anybody actually wanted to buy this swill—" "Please don't," Lily said, her voice breaking. The tears were flowing freely now, hot tracks down her cheeks that she couldn't wipe away fast enough. "Please, I worked all day." "That's all I have left. That's all you have left," Jason repeated in that same mocking sing-song voice. "Sounds like a personal problem to me." Derek leaned down, bringing his face level with Lily's, close enough that she could smell the cigarette smoke on his breath. "You want to know what I think?" he said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I think you're wasting your time. I think your brother is probably going to die no matter what you do, and sitting out here in the heat, selling bad lemonade, is just you pretending you have any control over it. You're fooling yourself, kid, and making the rest of us uncomfortable watching you beg." The words were designed to destroy, and they did their job. Lily felt something inside her collapse. All the hope and determination she'd built up over the past 2 days, crumbling under the weight of his cruelty. He was saying out loud the dark thoughts that lived in the back of her mind, the fears she couldn't quite push away no matter how hard she tried. "Now," Derek said, straightening up and reaching for the pitcher in Kyle's hands. "I think we've all had enough lemonade for one day. What do you say we put this poor girl out of her misery?" He took the pitcher, and Lily knew with terrible certainty what he was about to do. She could see it in his eyes, in the set of his shoulders, in the way Kyle and Jason were already stepping back to avoid the splash. "No," she said, but it came out as barely a whisper. "Please, no." Derek raised the pitcher high, tilting it toward the street, and Lily squeezed her eyes shut, unable to watch her entire day's work disappear into the gutter. But the sound she heard wasn't the splash of liquid hitting pavement. It was something else entirely. A low rumble, distant at first, then growing steadily louder. The sound of engines, multiple engines, throaty and powerful, coming from somewhere down the street. The sound of motorcycles, not 1 or 2, but many, getting closer with every passing second. Derek paused, the pitcher still raised, and turned his head toward the sound. Kyle and Jason turned too, their expressions shifting from amusement to uncertainty. The rumble grew into a roar, and the very air seemed to vibrate with it. And then, at the far end of Oakwood Drive, the first motorcycle appeared. The rumble that had started as a distant thunder now filled the street with a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The first motorcycle rounded the corner onto Oakwood Drive, sunlight glinting off its chrome, and behind it came another and another and another. They kept coming, a river of black leather and steel, filling the narrow suburban street with their presence, but they hadn't arrived yet. They were still 3 blocks away, their approach heralded by that growing roar that made windows rattle in their frames and set off car alarms along the street. Derek lowered the pitcher slightly, his attention divided between the approaching sound and the pathetic girl in front of him. He wasn't worried, not yet, just curious. Probably some weekend warrior club heading to a bar or a rally. Nothing to do with him. He turned back to Lily, the pitcher still in his hands, that cruel smile returning to his face. "Where were we?" he said. "Oh, right. We were about to see what happens when you mix lemonade with asphalt." But something had shifted in the air. The sound of the motorcycles was impossible to ignore now, and people were emerging from their houses, stepping onto porches and driveways, shading their eyes to look down the street. Mrs. Donovan had come down from her porch entirely, standing at the edge of her lawn. Mr. Walsh had walked to the sidewalk, his forgotten beer can dangling from his fingers. "Dude," Kyle said, his eyes on the approaching motorcycles. "That's a lot of bikes." "So what?" Derek said, but there was a slight edge to his voice now, a hint of uncertainty. "They're just passing through." Except they weren't passing through. The lead motorcycle was slowing, and the ones behind it were following suit, the roar dropping to a rumbling idle. They were 2 blocks away now, close enough that Lily could make out individual riders, all wearing black leather vests covered in patches. Jason took a step back from the table. "Maybe we should just go," he said. "We're not going anywhere," Derek snapped. "We were here first." But even as he said it, he set the pitcher down on the table, his posture shifting from casual dominance to something more alert, more defensive. The motorcycles were 1 block away now, and Lily could see that there weren't just 5 or 10 of them. There were dozens. They filled the street from curb to curb, moving in formation with a precision that suggested organization, purpose. The lead rider was a massive man with a grey-streaked beard, his leather vest adorned with more patches than Lily could count in the fading light, and they were all heading straight toward her lemonade stand. Derek's hands had curled into fists at his sides. Kyle and Jason had moved closer to him, the 3 of them instinctively clustering together as the motorcycles drew nearer. Around them, the neighborhood had gone completely silent, except for the rumble of engines. Every person on Oakwood Drive was watching now, no longer hiding behind curtains or pretending not to notice. "This is crazy," Jason muttered. "Why are there so many of them?" The lead motorcycle pulled up to the curb directly in front of Lily's stand and killed its engine. The silence that followed was almost as loud as the noise had been. The rider swung his leg over the bike with the easy grace of someone who'd done it 10,000 times, his boots hitting the pavement with solid authority. He was easily 6'4", broad across the shoulders, with arms covered in tattoos that disappeared under his leather vest. His face was weathered and hard, the face of a man who'd lived a full life and hadn't flinched from any of it. Behind him, more riders were pulling up, parking their bikes in neat rows along both sides of the street. They kept coming, more and more of them, until Oakwood Drive looked like the parking lot of a motorcycle rally. Lily counted 20, then 30, then lost track. There had to be at least 100 of them, maybe more. The lead rider removed his sunglasses and looked directly at Lily. His eyes were a startling blue, clear and sharp, despite the lines around them. Then his gaze moved to Derek, Kyle, and Jason, and something in his expression hardened. "Afternoon," he said, his voice a deep rumble that matched his bike. He wasn't speaking to the 3 young men. He was speaking to Lily. "This your stand?" Lily nodded, unable to find her voice. Her heart was hammering so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. The man looked at the sign, reading it carefully. "Help save my brother Noah," he said aloud. Then he looked back at Lily. "What's wrong with Noah?" "He needs a heart transplant," Lily managed to say, her voice small and shaky. "The surgery costs a lot of money, and we're trying to raise what we can." The man nodded slowly, taking this in. Behind him, more riders had dismounted and were approaching, forming a loose semicircle around the lemonade stand. They were men and women of all ages, all wearing the same leather vests with the same patches. The largest patch on the back showed a skull with wings and the words Hell's Angels arched above it. Derek had gone very still. He recognized those patches. Everyone in America recognized those patches. The Hell's Angels weren't just a motorcycle club. They were a legend, with a reputation that preceded them wherever they went. Some of it earned, some of it exaggerated, but all of it intimidating to 3 suburban kids who'd never faced anything more dangerous than a parking lot argument. "We were just leaving," Derek said, his voice lacking the confidence it had held moments before. "Were you?" the lead rider said, not looking at him. He was still focused on Lily. "Because it looked to me like you were giving this young lady a hard time." "We were just talking," Kyle said quickly. "Just conversation. Conversation," the man repeated. He finally turned his full attention to the 3 young men, and they all took an involuntary step backward. "That what you call it when you make a little girl cry?" "We didn't," Jason started, but the man held up one hand and Jason's mouth snapped shut. "I saw you from down the block," the man said. "Saw you mocking her. Saw you pour out her lemonade. Saw you pick up that pitcher like you were about to dump the whole thing." He took a step forward, and Derek took a step back. "What I want to know is what kind of man picks on a child in a wheelchair who's trying to save her brother's life?" "Look, we were just messing around," Derek said, his voice rising defensively. "It's not that serious." "Not that serious," the man repeated. "Kid, you just made the biggest mistake of your life, and you don't even know it yet." He turned to the crowd of riders behind him. "Hawk, get the brothers and sisters together. We're going to have a little talk with these boys." A tall, lean man with silver hair and sharp features stepped forward. He wore the same patches as the others, but his vest had additional insignia that suggested rank or seniority. He looked at Derek, Kyle, and Jason with the kind of cold assessment usually reserved for specimens in a lab. "You boys got names?" Hawk asked. "We don't have to tell you anything," Derek said, but his voice cracked slightly on the last word. "You're right," Hawk said. "You don't have to tell us. We can just call the police, show them the video evidence, and let them sort it out." He held up his phone, and on the screen was a clear recording of the last few minutes. Derek pouring out the lemonade, Jason holding the sign out of Lily's reach, the 3 of them laughing while she cried. Derek's face went pale. "You can't do that." "That's evidence," Hawk finished. "Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Evidence of harassment, possibly assault, depending on how the DA wants to play it. Definitely enough to make your lives very uncomfortable for the foreseeable future." More riders had gathered now, forming a wall of leather and denim between Lily and the 3 young men. They didn't say anything, didn't make any threatening gestures. They just stood there, solid and immovable. And their presence alone was enough to make Derek, Kyle, and Jason look like what they were, scared kids who'd bitten off far more than they could chew. Mrs. Donovan had her phone out now, recording everything. So did Mr. Walsh. So did the couple with the dog, who'd come running back when they heard the motorcycles. The entire neighborhood was documenting this moment, and there was nowhere for Derek and his friends to hide. The lead rider, the one the others had called Bear, though Lily didn't know that yet, crouched down beside her wheelchair, bringing himself to her eye level. Up close, she could see the scars on his knuckles, the tattoo of a heart on his forearm with the name Sarah written across it, the small gold cross on a chain around his neck. "You okay, sweetheart?" he asked quietly. Lily nodded, not trusting herself to speak without crying again. "Good," Bear said. He reached out and gently righted the cup that Derek had thrown on the table, setting it carefully back in its place. "Now I want you to listen to me very carefully. What those boys did to you was wrong. It was cruel and it was cowardly, and they're going to answer for it. But I need you to know something. You did nothing wrong. You hear me? Nothing. You're out here trying to save your brother, and that makes you braver than most adults I know." The kindness in his voice, after so much cruelty, broke something loose in Lily's chest. The tears came again, but this time they weren't tears of humiliation or fear. They were tears of relief, of feeling. For the first time all day, like someone saw her as more than a target or a problem. "Thank you," she whispered. Bear stood up, his knees cracking slightly, and turned back to Derek, Kyle, and Jason. The kindness vanished from his face, replaced by something harder and colder. "Now," he said, "let's talk about what happens next." The street had transformed in a matter of minutes. What had been a quiet suburban afternoon was now something else entirely. A staging ground, a courtroom, a moment frozen in time, where every person present understood they were witnessing something significant. Bear stood with his arms crossed, looking down at Derek, Kyle, and Jason with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world. Behind him, the Hell's Angels had formed ranks, a wall of leather and steel that stretched the entire length of the block. Lily counted at least 80 motorcycles, possibly more, each one perfectly parked, each rider standing beside their bike with military precision. They weren't just bikers. They were an organization, and the way they carried themselves spoke of discipline, hierarchy, and purpose. Some were older, grey-bearded veterans with faces carved by decades of sun and wind. Others were younger, their vests still relatively new, but their eyes held the same steady confidence. There were women among them too, standing shoulder to shoulder with the men, their presence just as commanding, and every single one of them was watching Derek, Kyle, and Jason with expressions that ranged from disgust to barely contained anger. "I didn't know," Derek said, his voice desperate now. "I didn't know you guys were coming. We were just what?" Hawk interrupted, stepping forward. He was leaner than Bear, but somehow more intimidating, with eyes that seemed to see straight through you. "Just having a little fun. Just passing the time by tormenting a disabled child." "She's not—" "We weren't," Kyle stammered. But the words died in his throat under Hawk's withering stare. Bear pulled out his phone, tapping the screen a few times before holding it up so everyone could see. "This is you, right?" he said, turning the phone toward Derek. On the screen, the video played, Derek pouring out the lemonade, the mocking laughter, Lily's tears. "This is definitely you." Derek's face had gone from pale to red, a flush of shame and anger creeping up his neck. "You can't just what?" Bear said calmly. "Can't just record you harassing someone in public. Kid, you're on a public street. You got no expectation of privacy here. And from where I'm standing, you got about 100 witnesses who saw exactly what you did." He was right. The entire neighborhood had gathered now. Mrs. Donovan stood at the edge of her lawn, with her phone still recording, her face tight with anger. Mr. Walsh had been joined by several other neighbors, all watching with varying expressions of shock, shame, and satisfaction. The couple with the dog had called over more people from the next street. Cars had stopped at both ends of the block, their drivers getting out to see what was happening, and every single one of them had seen Derek. Kyle and Jason for exactly what they were. "We're sorry," Jason blurted out, his voice cracking. "Okay, we're sorry. We'll leave. We'll never come back." "Sorry," Bear repeated, tasting the word like it was sour. "You're sorry now? Now that you got caught? Now that there's consequences?" He shook his head slowly. "That's not how sorry works, son." A woman stepped forward from the crowd of riders, her silver hair pulled back in a long braid that hung down her back. She wore the same vest as the others, but hers had patches that suggested she'd been riding with the Angels for decades. Her face was kind but firm, the face of someone who'd raised children and didn't tolerate nonsense. "That little girl," she said, pointing at Lily, "has been out here in 90-degree heat all day, trying to save her brother's life. All day. And you three couldn't walk past without making her feel small and worthless for 5 minutes of your entertainment." She stepped closer, and even though she barely came up to Derek's shoulder, he flinched back. "What kind of human being does that?" "We were just joking," Derek said weakly. "Joking," the woman repeated. "Let me tell you something about jokes, kid. A joke is funny. A joke makes people laugh, all people, including the person the joke's about. What you did wasn't a joke. It was cruelty, plain and simple." Another rider stepped forward, a massive man with arms like tree trunks and a face full of scars. "You know what we do in the Angels?" he said, his voice surprisingly soft for someone his size. We protect people who can't protect themselves. We stand up for kids, for women, for anybody who's getting pushed around by cowards who think they're tough." "That's right," said another rider, a younger man with bright blue eyes and a Marine Corps tattoo on his forearm. "We might look scary to you, but we live by a code. Respect, loyalty, and standing up for what's right. You three, you don't have any code at all." Derek was looking around now, desperate for an escape route, but there was none. The motorcycles blocked both ends of the street. The crowd of neighbors blocked the sidewalks, and the wall of Hell's Angels stood between him and any hope of walking away from this situation. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Bear smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "I want a lot of things," he said. "I want you to understand what you did. I want you to feel a fraction of the fear and humiliation you made that little girl feel. And I want you to make it right." "How?" Kyle asked, his voice trembling. "We're getting to that," Hawk said. He pulled out his phone again, scrolling through something. "First, let's talk about who you boys are." He looked at Derek. "Derek Ashford, 23 years old, 2 DUIs, 1 dropped assault charge from a bar fight last year. Currently on probation." He turned to Kyle. "Kyle Brenner, 22, possession with intent to distribute, pled down to simple possession. Community service still outstanding." Finally, he looked at Jason. "And Jason Ridge, 24, restraining order from an ex-girlfriend, pending lawsuit for property damage." All 3 young men stared at him in shock. "How did you—" Derek started. "We have friends in a lot of places," Hawk said simply. "And when we see something that needs addressing, we do our homework." He pocketed his phone. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to this young lady. A real apology, not the half-hearted sorry you tried a minute ago. And then you're going to reach into your wallets and contribute to her brother's surgery fund." "We don't have to do anything," Derek said. But there was no conviction in his voice. "You're right," Bear said. "You don't have to do anything. We can't make you. But what we can do is send this video to every social media platform we can think of. We can tag your employers, your families, your friends. We can make sure that everyone in this town knows exactly what you did today." He paused. "Or you can take responsibility right now, while you still have the chance." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing, waiting to see what would happen next. Derek looked at his friends, then at the ground, then at the wall of bikers surrounding them. He was trapped, and he knew it. Pride warred with self-preservation on his face, and for a long moment, Lily thought he might actually refuse. Then, slowly, he turned toward her. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words came out stiff and forced. "What I did was wrong. I shouldn't have mocked you or your brother, or tried to ruin your lemonade stand." "Look at her when you say it," Bear commanded. "Look her in the eye." Derek raised his head, meeting Lily's gaze for the first time since the bikers had arrived. She could see shame there now, real shame, cutting through the anger and defensiveness. "I'm sorry," he said again, and this time it sounded more genuine. "You didn't deserve any of that." Kyle and Jason followed suit, their apologies stumbling and awkward, but sincere enough. When they were done, Hawk gestured toward the cash box. "Now the contribution," he said. Derek pulled out his wallet with shaking hands, looking inside like he was hoping to find it empty. But there were bills there, and under the watchful eyes of 100 bikers and dozens of neighbors. He pulled them out, 2 20s, a 10 and a 5, and placed them in the cash box. Kyle added $30. Jason, after some hesitation, put in $50, $135. Combined with what Lily had made earlier, it was more money than she'd seen in the cash box all week. But Bear wasn't done. He turned to the crowd of Hell's Angels behind him and raised his voice so everyone could hear. "Brothers and sisters," he called out. "We got a little girl here trying to save her brother's life. I think we can do better than what these 3 donated, don't you?" A roar of agreement went up from the crowd, and suddenly bikers were moving forward, pulling out wallets, digging in pockets, pressing bills into Lily's hands faster than she could process. 20s, 50s, even a few hundreds appeared, filling the cash box until it overflowed. "Somebody get a bag," Bear called, and one of the riders jogged back to his bike. returning with a black leather saddlebag that he emptied and handed to Lily. The money kept coming. The bikers who'd already given were calling out to others. And soon, it wasn't just the Hells Angels contributing. Mrs. Donovan hurried across the street with her purse open, pressing a $100 bill into Lily's hand. Mr. Walsh added 50. The couple with the dog gave 20. The neighbors were running back to their houses and returning with cash, checks, anything they could contribute. Lily sat in her wheelchair, stunned, speechless, as the bag in her lap grew heavier and heavier. Tears streamed down her face, but these were different tears than the ones she'd cried earlier. These were tears of overwhelming gratitude, of hope, of the sudden understanding that sometimes, when you needed it most, the world could surprise you with its kindness. Bear crouched down beside her again, his weathered face breaking into a genuine smile. "How much does your brother's surgery cost?" he asked gently. $28,000, Lily whispered. Bear nodded slowly, then stood and turned to Hawk. "Get on the phone," he said. "Call the chapters in Mason County, Riverside, and Belmont. Tell them what's happening here. I want every angel in a 50-mile radius to know about Noah Brennan." Hawk grinned. "Already on it, boss." Bear looked down at Lily one more time. "We're not done here, sweetheart. Not even close. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. The sun had begun its descent toward the horizon, painting Oakwood Drive in shades of amber and gold. But the street showed no signs of emptying. If anything, more people had arrived. News traveled fast in small towns, and the sight of 100 Hells Angels motorcycles parked along a suburban street had drawn people from neighboring communities. They lined the sidewalks with their phones out, recording, posting, sharing. Lily sat surrounded by bikers, the leather bag in her lap now bulging with cash. She'd stopped trying to count it after the first $1,000. Her hands trembled as she held it, unable to fully process what was happening. Just an hour ago, she'd been alone and humiliated, watching her lemonade spill into the gutter while strangers laughed. Now she was surrounded by protection, by kindness, by people who'd come out of nowhere to stand beside her. Bear had stepped away to make a phone call, speaking in low tones to someone on the other end. When he returned, his expression was different, softer, almost emotional in a way that seemed at odds with his intimidating appearance. "Lily," he said, crouching down beside her wheelchair again. "I need to tell you something about why we're really here." The crowd around them quieted, sensing that something important was about to be revealed. Even Derek, Kyle, and Jason, who'd been standing off to the side under the watchful eyes of several bikers, turned to listen. Bear pulled something from his pocket, a photograph, worn at the edges like it had been carried for a long time. He held it out so Lily could see. It showed a young girl, maybe 9 or 10 years old, with bright eyes and a smile that lit up her whole face. She was sitting in a wheelchair, a pink one with streamers on the handlebars. "This was my daughter," Bear said quietly. "Sarah, she had muscular dystrophy, diagnosed when she was 7, wheelchair-bound by 9. His voice caught slightly, but he pushed through. "She was the bravest person I ever knew. Never complained, never asked why her, never let it stop her from living her life as fully as she could." Lily looked from the photo to Bear's face, seeing the pain there, old but still sharp. "We lived in a town not much different from this one," Bear continued. "And Sarah wanted to help other kids like her, kids who were sick or disabled and didn't have much support. So she started making friendship bracelets and selling them at a little table in front of our house. Spent hours on them, every color you could imagine." He paused, his jaw tightening. "One day I came home from work and found her crying. 3 teenage boys had come by while I was gone. They'd mocked her, called her names, told her she was wasting her time because nobody wanted bracelets made by a cripple. The word came out like poison. They'd taken her whole box of bracelets and thrown them in the storm drain. Months of work gone." Mrs. Donovan had her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Several of the bikers had removed their sunglasses, wiping at their eyes. "I called the police," Bear said. "But there was nothing they could do. The boys denied it, their parents protected them, and there were no witnesses who'd come forward. Sarah never set up her table again. She said it wasn't worth it if people were just going to be cruel. He looked at Lily directly now, his blue eyes intense. She passed away 2 years later. Heart complications. But before she died, she made me promise something. She made me promise that if I ever saw someone like her, someone trying to do good, trying to help, being brave in the face of a world that didn't always understand, I'd stand up for them. I'd be the person that nobody was for her that day. The silence that followed was profound. Even the sound of distant traffic seemed to fade away. When we were riding through town today, Bear continued, we saw your sign from 3 blocks away. And then we saw those 3, he jerked his head toward Derek and his friends, and I knew this was the moment Sarah was talking about. This was the promise I needed to keep. He stood up, addressing the crowd now, his voice carrying across the street. The Hells Angels Motorcycle Club gets a bad reputation sometimes. People see the leather, the patches, the bikes, and they make assumptions. But what people don't know is that we do charity work all over this country. We escort abused children to court so they feel safe. We stand guard at military funerals to protect families from protesters. We raise money for kids with cancer, for veterans, for anybody who needs help and isn't getting it. Hawk stepped forward, holding up his phone. We've already raised $11,000, he announced, from our chapters in the Tri-County area alone. And that's just in the last 30 minutes. A cheer went up from the crowd, but Bear held up his hand for quiet. But we're not just here to give money, he said. We're here to make sure justice is served. He turned to look at Derek, Kyle, and Jason, who shrank under his gaze. Officer Walsh, he called out. From the edge of the crowd, a police officer stepped forward. Lily recognized him, Officer Rachel Kim, who'd been directing traffic at the end of the block. She was young, maybe late 20s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense expression. I've been watching this whole thing, Officer Kim said, pulling out her notepad. And I've got about 50 witnesses who saw what happened before these gentlemen arrived. She looked at Derek. You want to tell me your version of events, or should I just go with what's on video? Derek opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing he could say. The evidence was overwhelming. Public harassment, Officer Kim said, writing in her notepad. Destruction of property, the lemonade you poured out. Possible assault given that you physically intimidated a minor. She looked up. And given that the victim is a disabled child and there's clear evidence of malicious intent, we're talking about enhanced charges. We already apologized, Kyle said desperately. We gave her money. Restitution doesn't erase the crime, Officer Kim said. But it might help with sentencing. She turned to Lily. Sweetheart, do you want to press charges? Lily looked at the 3 young men. They looked terrified now, all their earlier bravado stripped away. Part of her wanted to see them punished, wanted them to face real consequences for what they'd done. But another part of her, the part that her mother had raised to be kind, even when others weren't, hesitated. What would happen to them? She asked quietly. Probably fines, community service, maybe some jail time depending on the judge, Officer Kim said. It would go on their records. Bear crouched down beside Lily again. This is your choice, he said gently. Nobody can make it for you. But I'll tell you what I think Sarah would say. She'd say that real justice isn't just about punishment. It's about making sure this never happens again. It's about teaching people to be better. Lily looked at the photo of Sarah still in Bear's hand, at that bright smile and those brave eyes. She thought about her brother Noah, lying in a hospital bed, waiting for a surgery that might save his life. She thought about how much hate there was in the world, and how much more of it would exist if everyone just kept hurting each other in cycles of revenge and punishment. I want them to do community service, she said finally, at the children's hospital where Noah is. I want them to help other kids like him, kids who are scared and sick and need people to be kind to them. And I want them to write an apology, a real one, explaining what they did and why it was wrong, and I want it posted everywhere they posted anything about me. Officer Kim nodded approvingly. That's very mature of you. I'll make sure the DA knows that's what you're requesting." She turned to Derek, Kyle, and Jason. "You three are going to come with me to the station. We're going to file a report, and then you're going to have a very long conversation about your choices." As the three young men were escorted to Officer Kim's patrol car, Derek paused and turned back to Lily. "I really am sorry," he said. "And this time there was no forcing it, no performance. My mom has MS, she's in a wheelchair, and I just treated you the way I'm terrified of people treating her." His voice broke. "I'm so sorry." Lily nodded, accepting the apology, and Derek turned away, his shoulders shaking. When the patrol car pulled away, Bear stood and addressed the crowd one more time. "This is what community looks like," he said, his voice ringing out across the street. "This is what happens when people stop looking away and start standing up. Every single one of you who contributed money, who bore witness, who refused to let cruelty go unchallenged, you made this happen. Not us, you." He turned to Lily, and his weathered face broke into a smile. "And you, little sister, showed more courage and grace in the last hour than most people show in a lifetime. Your brother is lucky to have you." Lily felt the tears coming again, but she didn't try to stop them. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." "Don't thank us yet," Hawk said, stepping forward with his phone still in his hand. "Because I just got confirmation. Between the donations here, the money from other chapters, and a matching fund from one of our sponsors, we've raised $32,000. He grinned. "That's more than enough for Noah's surgery, with money left over for his recovery and medication." The street erupted in cheers. Mrs. Donovan was openly weeping. Mr. Walsh was clapping so hard his hands must have hurt. The couple with the dog were hugging each other. And Lily sat in her wheelchair, surrounded by 100 Hell's Angels, and felt, for the first time in months, like everything was going to be okay. Bear knelt down one last time, pressing the photo of Sarah into Lily's hand. "Keep this," he said. "And remember, when you see someone who needs help, be the person who stands up." That's how we honor the people we've lost. By being the help we wish they'd had. Lily clutched the photo to her chest, nodding through her tears. The sun continued its descent, and Oakwood Drive was bathed in golden light, a street transformed by the simple act of people choosing kindness over cruelty, action over apathy, and love over indifference. 3 days after the incident on Oakwood Drive, the community center on 5th Street was packed beyond capacity. Folding chairs filled every available space, and people lined the walls, standing shoulder to shoulder. The local news had picked up the story, and what had started as a viral video on social media had become a regional sensation. By the time the town council called for a special community meeting, the story of Lily Brennan, her lemonade stand, and the 100 Hell's Angels who'd come to her defense had been shared millions of times across the country. Lily sat in the front row, her mother Catherine beside her holding her hand. Catherine Brennan was a small woman with tired eyes and the kind of worn-down beauty that came from years of working double shifts and shouldering burdens that would have broken most people. She wore her nurse's scrubs because she'd come straight from the hospital, where Noah was resting comfortably, his surgery now fully funded and scheduled for the following week. "I still can't believe this is real," Catherine whispered, squeezing Lily's hand. "A week ago, I didn't know how we were going to afford his medication, let alone the surgery. And now everything's changed," Lily finished, looking around the packed room. She recognized faces from her street, Mrs. Donovan, Mr. Walsh, the couple with the dog. But there were so many others too, people from neighboring towns, reporters with cameras, and sitting in the back row, unmistakable in their leather vests, were Bear, Hawk, and at least 20 other Hell's Angels. The mayor, a portly man named Robert Chen, who'd held office for 12 years, stepped up to the microphone at the front of the room. He cleared his throat, and the murmur of conversation died down. "Good evening, everyone," he said, his voice amplified through the speaker system. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight. As many of you know, something extraordinary happened on Oakwood Drive this past Saturday. Something that has forced our community to take a hard look at itself." He paused, letting the words settle. "For those who haven't seen the video, And at this point, I think that's maybe 3 people in the country. An 11-year-old girl named Lily Brennan was harassed and mocked while trying to raise money for her brother's life-saving surgery. And while this was happening, many members of our community stood by and did nothing. As uncomfortable shifting rippled through the crowd. Several people looked down at their hands. But then, Mayor Chen continued, a group of men and women from the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club arrived. They stood up for Lily when others wouldn't. They raised over $30,000 in a matter of hours. And they reminded us of something we seem to have forgotten, that community means taking care of each other, especially the most vulnerable among us. He turned toward the back of the room. Vincent Castellano, who goes by Bear, has agreed to speak to us tonight. I think we all owe him, and his brothers and sisters, our attention and our gratitude. The room erupted in applause as Bear stood and made his way to the front. He moved with that same unhurried confidence Lily remembered from the street, his boots heavy on the hardwood floor. When he reached the microphone, he stood there for a moment, his weathered face serious, scanning the crowd with those sharp blue eyes. "I'm not much of a public speaker," he began, his voice gravelly but clear. "I'm more comfortable on a bike than behind a microphone. But there are some things that need to be said, and I guess I'm the one who needs to say them." He pulled out the photograph of Sarah, the same one he'd shown Lily, and held it up so the cameras could see. "This was my daughter. Her name was Sarah, and she died when she was 13 years old. Before she passed, she made me promise something. She made me promise that I'd stand up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. That I'd be the person who steps forward when everyone else steps back." The room was utterly silent now, every eye fixed on him. "When we rolled onto Oakwood Drive last Saturday, we didn't know what we'd find," Bear continued. "We saw the lemonade stand from a few blocks away, and we thought maybe we'd stop, buy some cups, give the kids some encouragement. But when we got closer, we saw what was really happening. We saw 3 grown men mocking a child, and we saw a street full of people pretending not to notice." He let that hang in the air for a moment. "Now, I'm not here to shame anybody. Lord knows I've had my own moments of cowardice, times when I should have stepped up and didn't. We all have. But what happened on that street wasn't just about 3 bullies and 1 little girl. It was about all of you." He pointed toward Mrs. Donovan. "You saw what was happening. You felt it was wrong, but you didn't know what to do, so you did nothing." Then to Mr. Walsh, "You too. You wanted to help, but you convinced yourself it wasn't your place." His finger swept across the room. "How many others? How many of you drove past or watched from your windows or heard what was happening and told yourselves it wasn't your problem?" The silence was deafening. Several people were crying openly now. "Here's what I learned that day," Bear said, his voice softening. "It only takes one person to stand up, to say this isn't right, to put themselves between cruelty and its target. Once one person moves, others will follow. We've seen it happen over and over again. But someone has to be first." He looked directly at Lily now and smiled. This young lady showed incredible courage. She was terrified, humiliated, and alone. But she didn't pack up her stand. She stayed. She kept hoping someone would see her, really see her, and treat her with the dignity she deserved. He turned back to the crowd. "My question for all of you is this. Who are you going to be the next time you see something wrong? Are you going to be the person who looks away? Or are you going to be the person who steps forward?" Hawk stood up from the back row and joined Bear at the front. "The Hells Angels Motorcycle Club has chapters all over this country," he said, his voice carrying that same quiet authority. "And everywhere we go, we see the same thing. Good people frozen by fear, by social pressure, by the belief that someone else will handle it. But here's the truth. There is no someone else. There's only us. There's only you." He held up his phone, showing the video that had gone viral. "This video has been viewed 20 million times. 20 million people have watched Lily being mocked, have watched that street full of silent witnesses, and have watched us arrive. And you know what the most common comment is? 'I wish I could be that brave. I wish I could stand up like that.'" Hawk's expression hardened. "But bravery isn't something you're born with. It's something you choose. Every single day, you choose whether to be brave or to be silent. And that choice defines who you are more than anything else. Mayor Chen stepped forward again. In light of what happened, the town council has voted unanimously to establish the Sierra Castellano Memorial Fund, he announced. It will provide financial assistance to families dealing with medical crises, and it will be administered by a board that includes representatives from the Hells Angels, local healthcare workers and community members. Bear's eyes widened, and for the first time, Lily saw his composure crack. His jaw tightened and he looked away, blinking rapidly. Additionally, the mayor continued, we're implementing a community watch program, not for crime, but for kindness. We're asking residents to report when they see someone in need, when they witness bullying or harassment, when they see an opportunity to help. We're going to build a network of people who've committed to being the person who steps forward. The applause started slowly, then built into a standing ovation. Bear wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand, and Hawk clapped him on the shoulder. Catherine leaned down to whisper in Lily's ear, "They're doing all of this because of you, sweetheart. Because you were brave enough to set up that stand, and brave enough to forgive those boys." Lily shook her head. "No," she said quietly. "They're doing it because of Sarah, and because Bear kept his promise." As the meeting began to wind down, people lined up to speak with Bear and Hawk, to shake their hands, to thank them. But Lily noticed something else happening too. Neighbors were talking to each other, exchanging phone numbers, making plans. Mrs. Donovan was organizing a meal train for families with sick children. Mr. Walsh was volunteering to help with transportation to medical appointments. The couple with the dog was setting up a fundraising page for other kids in Noah's situation. The community wasn't just talking about change. They were becoming it. Bear made his way over to Lily before he left, crouching down beside her wheelchair one more time. "Your brother's surgery is on Thursday," he said. "We'll be there. Not in the operating room, obviously, but in the waiting area." "You won't be alone. You don't have to do that," Lily said. "Yeah, we do," Bear replied. "That's what family does. And like it or not, you're part of the Angels family now." He stood up, touched 2 fingers to his forehead in a small salute, and headed for the door. As he left, Lily heard him say to Hawk, "Sarah would have loved this, you know." "All of it." "Yeah," Hawk agreed quietly. "She really would have." Outside, the sun had set completely, and the night was cool and clear. The motorcycles lined up along 5th Street, their engines rumbling to life one by one. As they pulled away, headlights cutting through the darkness, the sound of 100 bikes echoed through the town, like a promise, that when cruelty showed its face, there would always be someone ready to stand against it. And in the community center, as families gathered their things and headed home, every single person carried with them the same question Bear had asked. Who would they be the next time they saw something wrong? The answer to that question would determine not just the character of individuals, but the soul of the entire community. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made everything feel possible. The surgical waiting room at County General Hospital was unusually crowded for 7 o'clock in the morning. Lily Brennan sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes red from lack of sleep but sharp with hope. Beside her, Lily held the photograph of Sarah that Bear had given her, running her thumb over the worn edges like a talisman and filling the rest of the waiting room. Spilling out into the hallway and the adjacent family lounge were the Hells Angels. Bear sat directly across from Lily and her mother, still wearing his leather vest, despite the hospital's air conditioning. Hawk stood by the window, watching the sunrise paint the parking lot in shades of pink and gold. At least 40 other members had shown up, some who'd ridden through the night from chapters 3 states away. They weren't the only ones who'd come. Mrs. Donovan arrived at 7:15 with thermoses of coffee and bags of homemade muffins. Mr. Walsh came at 7:30, followed by a steady stream of neighbors from Oakwood Drive. The couple with the dog brought flowers. Even Mayor Chen showed up, taking a seat in the corner and declining all attempts to make his presence into a photo opportunity. "The surgery will take between 4 and 6 hours," Catherine said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. "Dr. Patterson is one of the best pediatric cardiac surgeons in the region. Noah's in good hands." "The best hands," Bear agreed. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "And when he wakes up, he's going to have a whole army of people waiting to celebrate with him." At 7:45, a nurse came through the double doors and called Catherine's name. "Mrs. Brennan?" "Noah's being prepped now. You can see him before we take him in." Catherine stood quickly, then looked down at Lily. "Do you want to come?" Lily nodded, and together they followed the nurse through the doors, down a long hallway painted in cheerful colors that didn't quite mask the antiseptic smell and the underlying tension of a place where life and death made their negotiations. Noah was in a pre-op room, looking impossibly small in the hospital bed. At 8 years old, he was thin from months of illness, his skin pale against the white sheets. But when he saw his mother and sister, his face lit up with that gap-toothed smile that Lily loved so much. "Hey, Mom. Hey, Lily," he said, his voice raspy from the breathing tube they'd inserted during the night. "Hey, champ," Catherine said, sitting on the edge of his bed and taking his hand. "How are you feeling?" "Kinda scared," Noah admitted, "but also kinda excited. Dr. Patterson said after this, I'll be able to run again. Maybe even play soccer." "You'll be able to do anything you want," Lily said, wheeling herself closer to the bed. She reached out and took his other hand. "You're the bravest person I know, Noah, even braver than 100 motorcycle riders." Noah's eyes widened. "Are they really here?" "The bikers who helped you. Every single one of them," Catherine said. "And about 50 other people, too. You've got a whole cheering section waiting for you." A surgical nurse entered, checking monitors and making notes on a clipboard. "It's time," she said gently. Catherine kissed Noah's forehead, her lips lingering there for a long moment. "I love you so much," she whispered. "More than all the stars in the sky." "Love you too, Mom," Noah said. Then he looked at Lily. "Thanks for the lemonade stand." "You're the best big sister ever." Lily felt tears streaming down her face, but she smiled through them. "You better come back to me, okay? I didn't go through all that just for you to bail on me now." "Deal," Noah said with a weak smile. They watched as the surgical team wheeled Noah's bed toward the operating room doors. Catherine's hand found Lily's, and they held onto each other as their little boy disappeared through the double doors that read, "Authorized personnel only." The waiting began. Hours crawled by like wounded things. Bear and Hawk kept a steady presence, alternating between the waiting room and the hallway, always making sure someone from the Angels was visible. A reminder that the Brennans weren't alone. Mrs. Donovan knitted nervously in the corner. Mr. Walsh read the same page of his newspaper 17 times. The couple with the dog played quiet card games to pass the time. At hour 3, a surgical nurse came out with an update. "Everything's going well. Dr. Patterson is pleased with the progress." At hour 5, another update. "Still progressing smoothly? Shouldn't be much longer now." At hour 6 and 43 minutes, the operating room doors opened, and Dr. Patricia Patterson emerged, still in her surgical scrubs and cap, pulling down her mask. Catherine and Lily were on their feet immediately, and the entire waiting room held its collective breath. Dr. Patterson smiled. "The surgery was a complete success," she said, and the waiting room erupted. "Noah came through beautifully. His new heart is functioning perfectly. We'll keep him in intensive care for the next few days, but barring any complications, he should make a full recovery." Catherine collapsed into Bear's arms, sobbing with relief. Lily buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Around them, bikers were hugging each other. Neighbors were crying, and strangers were exchanging high fives like they'd just won the championship game of their lives. Dr. Patterson waited for the celebration to quiet down. "I have to say, in 20 years of practicing medicine, I've never seen anything like this. The fundraising, the community support, the outpouring of love. It's extraordinary. This is what healthcare should look like. People taking care of people." She looked at Lily directly. "Your brother is alive today. because you were brave enough to ask for help, and because these people," she gestured around the room, "were brave enough to give it. Never forget that." 3 weeks later, Noah was discharged from the hospital. The Hells Angels organized an escort home, 50 motorcycles flanking the Brennan family's car as they drove slowly down Oakwood Drive. The entire neighborhood had come out to welcome them home. Banners hung from porches, balloons decorated mailboxes, and a massive "Welcome Home Noah" sign stretched across the street. Lily watched from the car window as her brother took it all in, his eyes wide with wonder. He was still weak, still healing, but there was color in his cheeks now and strength in his voice when he said, "This is the coolest thing ever." Bear pulled his motorcycle up alongside their car and gave Noah a thumbs up. Noah returned it with a grin that could have powered the whole street. As they pulled into their driveway, Lily saw something that made her breath catch. Someone had set up a new lemonade stand on their front lawn. A professional one this time, with a real table, a colorful umbrella, and a sign that read, "Noah's Lemonade Stand. All proceeds go to the Sara Castellano Memorial Fund." Catherine covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her face again. "They did this while we were gone," she whispered. Over the following months, Noah's Lemonade Stand became a fixture in the neighborhood. Lily ran it every weekend, with Noah helping when he was strong enough. They never had another incident of harassment. In fact, they had the opposite problem. So many people wanted to help that they had to create a volunteer schedule. Derek, Kyle and Jason completed their community service at the hospital, working in the children's ward. The experience changed them. Derek in particular seemed transformed. He'd begun volunteering extra hours beyond his requirement, reading to kids who were too sick to hold books themselves. One Saturday afternoon, he stopped by Noah's lemonade stand. Lily tensed when she saw him, but he held up his hands in a peaceful gesture. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said quietly, "for giving me a chance to be better than I was. My mom came to visit me last week while I was at the hospital. She met some of the kids I've been working with, and she told me she was proud of me for the first time in years." His voice cracked. "So thank you for not giving up on me," Lily smiled. "Sarah would have said everyone deserves a second chance." "Sarah was right," Derek said. He bought 3 cups of lemonade, left a $100 bill, and walked away. The Sara Castellano Memorial Fund grew beyond anyone's expectations. Within a year, it had helped 17 families pay for medical treatments. The Hells Angels continued to be involved, organizing fundraising runs and charity events. And Bear kept his promise to Sarah, showing up whenever and wherever someone needed someone to stand beside them. On the 1-year anniversary of that August afternoon, the city dedicated a small park on Oakwood Drive. It featured a playground designed to be accessible to children with disabilities, benches donated by the Hells Angels, and a bronze plaque with Sarah's photograph and a quote, "Be the person who steps forward." At the dedication ceremony, with Noah healthy and strong beside her, Lily gave a speech. She talked about fear and courage, about community and kindness, about how one moment of standing up could ripple outward and change everything. "A year ago, I was alone and afraid," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd. "Today, I'm surrounded by family, some related by blood, some by choice, all bound together by the decision to be better, to do better, to be the people who step forward when others step back." She looked at Bear, standing in the front row with Hawk and the rest of the angels. "Thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for being there when no one else was. And thank you for teaching all of us that heroism isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and choosing to act anyway." As the sun set over the new park, children played on equipment that welcomed everyone. Neighbors gathered in conversation that crossed all the old boundaries. And a community that had once looked away now looked at each other with the understanding that they were all responsible for each other. And somewhere, Lily liked to think, Sarah was smiling because the promise had been kept. The stand had been taken, And the world was a little bit brighter because one girl refused to give up and 100 strangers refused to look away. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.